Chapter 7 of The Creature That Time Forgot by Ray Bradbury. It was morning. Light came shouting and sobbing down a corridor and ran full into his arms. She had changed again. She was older again, more beautiful. She was shaking and she held to him. "Sim, they're coming after you." Bare feet marched down the corridor, surged inward at the opening. Cheon stood grinning there, taller too, a sharp rock in either of his hands.
"Oh, there you are, Sim."
"Go away!" cried Light savagely, whirling on him.
"Not until we take Sim with us,"
Cheon assured her. Then, smiling at Sim,
"if, that is, he is with us in the fight."
Dink shuffled forward, his eye weakly fluttering, his bird-like hands fumbling in the air.
"Leave!"
he shrilled angrily.
"This boy is a scientist now. He works with us."
Cheon ceased smiling.
"There is better work to be done. We go now to fight the people in the farthest cliffs."
His eyes glittered anxiously.
"Of course, you will come with us, Sim."
"No, no!" Light clutched at his arm. Sim patted her shoulder, then turned to Cheon. "Why are you attacking these people?"
"There are 3 extra days for those who go with us to fight."
3 extra days? Of living?" Cheon nodded firmly.
"If we win, we live 11 days instead of 8. The cliffs they live in, something about the mineral in it. Think of it, Sim. 3 long, good days of life. Will you join us?"
Dink interrupted.
"Get along without him. Sim is my pupil."
Cheon snorted.
"Go die, old man. By sunset tonight you'll be charred bone. Who are you to order us? We are young. We want to live longer."
11 days. The words were unbelievable to Sim. 11 days. Now he understood why there was war. Who wouldn't fight to have his life lengthened by almost half its total? So many more days of youth and love and seeing and living. Yes, why not indeed?
3 extra days,
called Dink, stridently.
"If you live to enjoy them. If you're not killed in battle. If. You have never won yet. You have always lost. But this time," Cheon declared sharply, "we'll win."
Sim was bewildered. "But we are all of the same ancestors. Why don't we all share the best cliffs?" Cheon laughed and adjusted a sharp stone in his hand.
"Those who live in the best cliffs think they are better than us. That is always man's attitude when he has power. The cliffs there, besides, are smaller. There's room for only 300 people in them."
3 extra days. "I'll go with you," Sim said to Cheon.
"Fine."
Cheon was very glad. Much too glad at the decision. Dink gasped. Sim turned to Dink and Light. "If I fight and win, I will be a half-mile closer to the ship, and I'll have 3 extra days in which to strive to reach the ship. That seems the only thing for me to do." Dink nodded sadly.
"It is the only thing. I believe you. Go along now."
"Goodbye," said Sim. The old man looked surprised. Then he laughed as at a little joke on himself.
"That's right. I won't see you again, will I? Goodbye, then."
And they shook hands. They went out, Cheon, Sim, and Light together, followed by the others, all children growing swiftly into fighting men. And the light in Cheon's eyes was not a good thing to see. Light went with him. She chose his rocks for him and carried them. She would not go back, no matter how he pleaded. The sun was just beyond the horizon, and they marched across the valley. "Please, Light, go back."
"And wait for Cheon to return," she said. "He plans that when you die I will be his mate."
She shook out her unbelievable blue-white curls of hair defiantly.
"But I'll be with you. If you fall, I fall.
Sim's face hardened. He was tall. The world had shrunk during the night. Children in packs screamed by hilarious in their food searching, and he looked at them with alien wonder. Could it be only 4 days ago he had been like these? Strange. There was a sense of many days in his mind, as if he had really lived 1,000 days. There was a dimension of incident and thought so thick, so multicolored, so richly diverse in his head that it was not to be believed so much could happen in so short a time. The fighting men ran in clusters of 2 or 3. Sim looked ahead at the rising line of small, ebon cliffs. This, then, he said to himself, is my 4th day. And still I am no closer to the ship, or to anything. Not even— he heard the light tread of light beside him. Not even to her who bears my weapons and picks me ripe berries. 1/2 of his life was gone. Or 1/3 of it, if he won this battle. If. He ran easily, lifting, letting fall his legs. This is the last day of my physical awareness. As I run, I feed. As I feed, I grow. And as I grow, I turn eyes to light with a kind of dizzying vertigo. And she looks upon me with the same gentleness of thought. This is the day of our youth. Are we wasting it? Are we losing it on a dream? A folly? Distantly he heard laughter. As a child he'd questioned it. Now he understood laughter. This particular laughter was made of climbing high rocks and plucking the greenest blades and drinking the headiest vintage from the morning ices and eating of the rock fruits and tasting of young lips and new appetite. They neared the cliffs of the enemy. He saw the slender erectness of light, the new surprise of her white breasts, the neck where, if you touched, you could time her pulse. The fingers which cupped in your own were animate and supple and never still. The Light snapped her head to one side. "Look ahead," she cried. "See what is to come. Look only ahead." He felt that they were racing by part of their lives, leaving their youth on the path side without so much as a glance. "I am blind with looking at stones," he said, running. "Find new stones, then." "I see stones." His voice grew gentle as the palm of her hand. The landscape floated under him. Everything was like a fine wind, blowing dreamily. "I see stones that make a ravine, that lies in a cool shadow where the stone berries are thick as tears. You touch a boulder and the berries fall in silent red avalanches, and the grass is very tender." "I do not see it." She increased her pace, turning her head away. He saw the floss upon her neck, like the small moss that grows silvery and light on the cool side of pebbles, that stirs if you breathe the lightest breath upon it. He looked upon himself. His hands clenched as he heaved himself forward toward death. Already his hands were veined and youth swollen. They were the hands of a young boy whose fingers are made for touching, which are suddenly sensitive, and with more surface, and are nervous, and seem not a part of him, because they are so big for the slender lengths of his arms. His neck, through which the blood ached and pumped, was building out with age, too, with tiny blue tendrils of veins embedded and flaring in it. Light handed him food to eat. "I am not hungry," he said. "Eat. Keep your mouth full," she commanded sharply, "so you will not talk to me this way." "If I could only kiss you," he pleaded. "Just one time." "After the battle there may be time." "Gods!" he roared, anguished. "Who cares for battles?" Ahead of them, rocks hailed down, thudding. A man fell with his skull split wide. The war was begun. Light passed the weapons to him. They ran without another word until they entered the killing round. Then he spoke, not looking at her, his cheeks coloring. "Thank you," he said. She ducked as a slung stone shot by her head. "It was not an easy thing for me," she admitted. "Sim, be careful!" The boulders began to roll in a synthetic avalanche from the battlements of the enemy. Only one thought was in his mind now. To kill, to lessen the life of someone else, so he could live. To gain a foothold here and live long enough to make a stab at the ship. He ducked, he weaved, He clutched stones and hurled them up. His left hand held a flat stone shield with which he diverted the swiftly plummeting rocks. There was a spatting sound everywhere. Light ran with him, encouraging him. 2 men dropped before him, slain, their breasts cleaved to the bone, their blood springing out in unbelievable founts. It was a useless conflict. Sim realized instantly how insane the venture was. They could never storm the cliff. A solid wall of rocks rained down. A dozen men dropped with shards of ebony in their brains. A half-dozen more showed drooping, broken arms. One screamed, and the up-thrust white joint of his knee was exposed as the flesh was pulled away by 2 successive blows of well-aimed granite. Men stumbled over one another. The muscles in his cheeks pulled tight, and he began to wonder why he had ever come. But his raised eyes, as he danced from side to side, weaving and bobbing, sought always the cliffs. He wanted to live there so intensely. To have his chance, he would have to stick it out, but the heart was gone from him. Light screamed piercingly. Sim, his heart panicking, twisted and saw that her hand was loose at the wrist, with an ugly wound bleeding profusely on the back of the knuckles. She clamped it under her armpit to soothe the pain. The anger rose in him and exploded. In his fury, he raced forward, throwing his missiles with deadly accuracy. He saw a man topple and flail down, falling from one level to another of the caves, a victim of his shot. He must have been screaming, for his lungs were bursting open and closed, and his throat was raw, and the ground spun madly under his racing feet. The stone that clipped his head sent him reeling and plunging back. He ate sand. The universe dissolved into purple whirls. He could not get up. He lay and knew that this was his last day, his last time. The battle raged around him. Dimly he felt Light over him. Her hands cooled his head. She tried to drag him out of range, but he lay gasping and telling her to leave him.
"Stop!"
shouted a voice. The whole war seemed to give pause.
"Retreat!"
commanded the voice swiftly, and as Sim watched lying upon his side, his comrades turned and fled back toward home.
"The sun is coming! Our time is up!"
He saw their muscled backs, their moving, tensing, flickering legs go up and down. The dead were left upon the field. The wounded cried for help. But there was no time for the wounded. There was only time for swift men to run the gauntlet home, and their lungs aching and raw with heated air burst into their tunnels before the sun burnt and killed them. The sun! Sim saw another figure racing toward him. It was Cheon. Light was helping Sim to his feet, whispering helpfully to him. "Can you walk?" she asked, and he groaned and said, "I think so." "Walk then," she said. "Walk slowly, and then faster and faster. We'll make it. Walk slowly, start carefully. We'll make it. I know we will." Sim got to his feet, stood swaying. Cheon raced up, a strange expression cutting lines in his cheeks, his eyes shining with battle. Pushing Light abruptly aside, he seized upon a rock and dealt Sim a jolting blow upon his ankle that laid wide the flesh. All of this was done quite silently. Now he stood back, still not speaking, grinning like an animal from the night mountains, his chest panting in and out, looking from the thing he had done to Light and back. He got his breath. "He'll never make it," he nodded at Sim. "We'll have to leave him here. Come along, Light." Light, like a cat animal, sprang upon Cheon, searching for his eyes, shrieking through her exposed, hard-pressed teeth. Her fingers stroked great bloody furrows down Cheon's arms and again instantly down his neck. Cheon, with an oath, sprang away from her. She hurled a rock at him. Grunting, he let it miss him, then ran off a few yards. "Fool!" he cried, turning to scorn her. "Come along with me. Sim will be dead in a few minutes. Come along!" Light turned her back on him. "I will go if you carry me." Cheon's face changed. His eyes lost their gleaming. "There is no time. We would both die if I carried you." Light looked through and beyond him. "Carry me, then, for that's how I wish it to be." Without another word, glancing fearfully at the sun, Cheon fled. His footsteps sped away and vanished from hearing. "May he fall and break his neck." whispered Light, savagely glaring at his form as it skirted a ravine. She returned to Sim.
"Can you walk?"
Agonies of pain shot up his leg from the wounded ankle. He nodded, ironically. "We could make it to the cave in 2 hours walking." "I have an idea, Light. Carry me." And he smiled with a grim joke. She took his arm. "Nevertheless, we'll walk. Come." "No," he said. "We're staying here."
"But why?"
"We came to seek a home here. If we walk, we will die. I would rather die here. How much time have we?" Together they measured the sun.
"A few minutes,"
she said, her voice flat and dull. She held close to him. He looked at her. Light, he thought. Tomorrow I would have been a man. My body would have been strong and full, and there would have been time with you. A kissing and a touching. Damn! But what kind of life is this, where every last instant is drenched with fear and alert with death? Am I to be denied even some bit of real life? The black rocks of the cliff were paling into deep purples and browns as the sun began to flood the world. What a fool he was. He should have stayed and worked with Dink, and thought and dreamed, and at least one time cupped Light's mouth with his own, with the sinews of his neck standing out defiantly. He bellowed upward at the cliff holes. "Send me down one man to do battle!" Silence. His voice echoed from the cliff. The air was warm.
"It's no use," said Light. "They'll pay no attention."
He shouted again. "Hear me!" He stood with his weight on his good foot, his injured left leg throbbing and pulsating with pain. He shook a fist. "Send down a warrior who is no coward. I will not turn and run home. I have come to fight a fair fight. Send a man who will fight for the right to his cave. Him I will surely kill." More silence. A wave of heat passed over the land, receded. "Oh, surely," mocked Sim, hands on naked hips, head back, mouth wide. "Surely there's one among you not afraid to fight a cripple." Silence. "No?" Silence. "Then I have miscalculated you. I'm wrong. I'll stand here then until the sun shucks the flesh off my bone and black scraps and call you the filthy names you deserve." He got an answer. "I do not like being called names," replied a man's voice. Sim leaned forward, forgetting his crippled foot. A huge man appeared in a cave mouth on the 3rd level. "Come down," urged Sim. "Come down, fat one, and kill me." The man scowled seriously at his opponent a moment, then lumbered slowly down the path, his hands empty of any weapons. Immediately every cave above clustered with heads, an audience for this drama. The man approached Sim. "We will fight by the rules, if you know them." "I'll learn as we go," replied Sim. This pleased the man, and he looked at Sim warily, but not unkindly. "This much I will tell you," offered the man generously. "If you die, I will give your mate shelter, and she will live, as she pleases, because she is the wife of a good man." Sim nodded swiftly. "I am ready," he said. "The rules are simple. We do not touch each other, save with stones. The stones and the sun will do either of us in. Now is the time." End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8 of The Creatures That Time Forgot by Ray Bradbury. A tip of the sun showed on the horizon. "My name is Nosh," said Sim's enemy, casually fingering up a handful of pebbles and stones, weighing them. Sim did likewise. He was hungry. He had not eaten for many minutes. Hunger was the curse of this planet's people. A perpetual demanding of empty stomachs for more food. His blood flushed weakly, shot tinglingly through veins and jolting throbs of heat and pressure. His rib case shoved out, went in, shoved out again, impatiently. "No!" roared the 300 watchers from the cliffs. "No!" They clamored, the men and women and children balanced in turmoil on the ledges. "No! Begin!" As if at a cue, the sun leaped high. It smote them with a blow as with a flat, sizzling stone. The two men staggered under the molten impact. Sweat broke from their naked thighs and loins under their arms, and on their faces was a glaze like fine glass. Naj shifted his huge weight and looked at the sun as if in no hurry to fight. Then silently, with no warning, he knurked out a pebble with startling trigger flick of thumb and forefinger. It caught Sim flat on the cheek, staggered him back so that a rocket of unbearable pain climbed up his crippled foot and burst into nervous explosion at the pit of his stomach. He tasted blood from his bleeding cheek. Naj moved serenely. 3 more flickers of his magic hands, and 3 tiny, seemingly harmless bits of stone flew like whistling birds. Each of them found a target, slammed it. The nerve centers of Sim's body. One hit his stomach so that 10 hours eating almost slit up his throat. A second got his forehead. A third his neck. He collapsed to the boiling sand. His knee made a wrenching sound on the hard earth. His face was colorless, and his eyes, squeezed tight, were pushing tears out from the hot, quivering lids. But even as he had fallen, he had let loose, with wild force, his handful of stones. The stones purred in the air. One of them, and only one, struck Naj. Upon the left eyeball, Naj moaned and laid his hands in the next instant to his shattered eye. Sim choked out a bitter, sighing laugh. This much triumph he had. The eye of his opponent. It would give him time. Oh, gods, he thought, his stomach retching sickly, fighting for breath. This is a world of time. Give me a little more, just a trifle. Naj, one-eyed, weaving with pain, pelted the writhing body of Sim, but his aim was off now. The stones flew to one side, or if they struck at all, they were weak and spent and lifeless. Sim forced himself half erect. From the corners of his eyes he saw light, waiting, staring at him, her lips breathing words of encouragement and hope. He was bathed in sweat, as if a rain spray had showered him down. The sun was now fully over the horizon. You could smell it. Stones glinted like mirrors. The sand began to roil and bubble. Illusions sprang up everywhere in the valley. Instead of one warrior, Naj, he was confronted by a dozen. Each in an upright position, preparing to launch another missile. A dozen irregular warriors who shimmered in the golden menace of a day, like bronze gongs, smitten, quivered in one vision. Sim was breathing desperately. His nostrils flared and sucked, and his mouth drank thirstily of flame instead of oxygen. His lungs took fire like silk torches, and his body was consumed. The sweat spilled from his pores to be instantly evaporated. He felt himself shriveling in on himself. He imagined himself looking like his father, old, sunken, slight, withered. Where was the sand? Could he move? Yes. The world wriggled under him, but now he was on his feet. There would be no more fighting. A murmur from the cliff told this. The sunburnt faces of the high audience gaped and jeered and shouted encouragement to their warrior. "Stand straight, Naj! Save your strength now! Stand tall and perspire!" they urged him. And Naj stood, swaying lightly, swaying slowly, a pendulum in an incandescent fiery breath from the skyline. "Don't move, Naj! Save your heart! Save your power!" "The test! The test!" said the people on the heights. "The test of the sun!" And this was the worst part of the fight. Sim squinted painfully at the distorted illusion of cliff. He thought he saw his parents, father with his defeated face, his green eyes burning, mother with her hair blowing like a cloud of gray smoke in the fire wind. He must get to them, live for and with them. Behind him, Sim heard Light whimper softly. There was a whisper of flesh against sand. She had fallen. He did not dare turn. The strength of turning would bring him thundering down in pain and darkness. His knees bent. If I fall, he thought, I'll lie here and become ashes. Where was Naj? Naj was there, a few yards from him, standing bent, slick with perspiration, looking as if he were being hit over the spine with great hammers of destruction.
"Fall, Naj! Fall!" screamed Sim mentally. "Fall! Fall! Fall and die so I can take your place!" But Naj did not fall. One by one the pebbles in his half-loose left hand plummeted to the broiling sands, and Naj's lips peeled back. The saliva burned away from his lips and his eyes glazed. But he did not fall. The will to live was strong in him. He hung as if by a wire. Sim fell to one knee.
"Ah!"
wailed the knowing voices from the cliff. They were watching death. Sim jerked his head up, smiling mechanically, foolishly, as if caught in the act of doing something silly. "No, no," he insisted drowsily and got back up again. There was so much pain he was all one ringing numbness. A whirring, buzzing, frying sound filled the land. High up an avalanche came down like a curtain on a drama, making no noise. Everything was quiet except for a steady humming. He saw 50 images of Naj now, dressed in armors of sweat, eyes puffed with torture, cheeks sunken, lips peeled back like the rind of a drying fruit. But the wire still held him. "Now," muttered Sim sluggishly with a thick, baked tongue between his blazing teeth. "Now I'll fall and lie and dream." He said it with slow, thoughtful pleasure. He planned it. He knew how it must be done. He would do it accurately. He lifted his head to see if the audience was watching. They were gone. The sun had driven them back in, all save 1 or 2 brave ones. Sim laughed drunkenly and watched the sweat gather on his dead hands, hesitate, drop off, plunge downward towards sand, and turn to steam halfway there. Naj fell. The wire was cut. Naj fell flat upon his stomach. A gout of blood kicked from his mouth. His eyes rolled back into a white, senseless insanity. Naj fell. So did his 50 duplicate illusions. All across the valley the winds sang and moaned, and Sim saw a blue lake with a blue river feeding it, and low white houses near the river with people going and coming in the houses, and among the tall green trees. Trees taller than 7 men beside the river mirage. "Now," explained Sim to himself at last, "now I can fall. Right into that lake." He fell forward. He was shocked when he felt the hands eagerly stop him in mid-plunge, lift him, hurry him off, high in the hungry air like a torch held and waved ablaze. How strange is death, he thought, and blackness took him. He wakened to the flow of cool water on his cheeks. He opened his eyes fearfully. Light held his head upon her lap. Her fingers were moving food to his mouth. He was tremendously hungry and tired, but fear squeezed both of these things away. He struggled upward, seeing the strange cave contours overhead. "What time is it?" he demanded. "The same day as the contest. Be quiet," she said. "The same day?" She nodded amusedly. "You've lost nothing of your life. This is Naj's cave. We are inside the Black Cliff. We will live 3 extra days. Satisfied? Lie down." "Naj is dead?" He fell back, panting, his heart slamming his ribs. He relaxed slowly. "I won. Gods, I won," he breathed. "Naj is dead. So were we almost. They carried us in from outside only in time." He ate ravenously. "We have no time to waste. We must get strong. My leg." He looked at it, tested it. There was a swath of long yellow grasses around it, and the ache had died away. Even as he watched, the terrific pulsings of his body went to work and cured away the impurities under the bandages. It has to be strong enough by sunset, he thought. It has to be. He got up and limped around the cave like a captured animal. He felt Light's eyes upon him. He could not meet her gaze. Finally, helplessly, he turned. She interrupted him. "You want to go on to the ship?" she asked softly. "Tonight, when the sun goes down?"
He took a breath, exhaled it. Yes.
You couldn't possibly wait until morning?
No.
Then I'll go with you. No. If I lag behind, let me. There's nothing here for me.
They stared at each other a long while. He shrugged warily. All right, he said at last. I couldn't stop you, I know that. We'll go together. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 of The Creatures That Time Forgot by Ray Bradbury. They waited in the mouth of their new cave. The sun set. The stones cooled so that one could walk on them. It was almost time for the leaping out and the running toward the distant, glittering metal seed that lay on the far mountain. Soon would come the rains. And Sim thought back over all the times he had watched the rains thicken into creeks, into rivers, that cut new beds each night. One night there would be a river running north, the next a river running northeast, the third night a river running due west. The valley was continually cut and scarred by the torrents. Earthquakes and avalanches filled the old beds. New ones were the order of the day. It was this idea of the river and the directions of the river that he had turned over in his head for many hours. It might possibly... Well, he would wait and see. He noticed how living in this new cliff had slowed his pulse, slowed everything. A mineral result. Protection against the solar radiations. Life was still swift, but not as swift as before.
Now, Sim,
cried Light, testing the valley air. They ran, between the hot death and the cold one, together away from the cliffs out toward the distant beckoning ship. Never had they run this way in their lives. The sound of their feet running was a hard, insistent clatter over vast oblongs of rock, down into ravines, up the sides, and on again. They raked the air in and out of their lungs. Behind them, the cliffs faded away into things they could never turn back to now. They did not eat as they ran. They had eaten to the bursting point in the cave to save time. Now it was only running. A lifting of legs, a balancing of bent elbows, a convulsion of muscles, a slaking in of air that had been firing was now cooling.
Are they watching us?
Light's breathless voice snatched at his ears above the pounding of his heart. Who? But he knew the answer. The cliff peoples, of course. How long had it been since a race like this one? 1,000 days? 10,000? How long since someone had taken the chance and sprinted with an entire civilization's eyes upon their backs, into gullies across cooling plain? Were there lovers pausing in their laughter back there, gazing at the two tiny dots that were a man and woman running toward destiny? Were children eating of new fruits and stopping in their play to see the two people racing against time? Was Dink still living, narrowing hairy eyebrows down over fading eyes, shouting them on in a feeble, rasping voice, shaking a twisted hand? Were there jeers? Were they being called fools, idiots? And in the midst of the name-calling were people praying them on, hoping they would reach the ship? Yes. Under all the cynicism and pessimism, some of them, all of them, must be praying. Sim took a quick glance at the sky, which was beginning to bruise with the coming night. Out of nowhere, clouds materialized and a light shower trailed across a gully 200 yards ahead of them. Lightning beat down upon distant mountains, and there was a strong scent of ozone on the disturbed air.
The halfway mark,
panted Sim, and he saw Light's face half turn, longingly looking back at the life she was leaving.
Now's the time. If we want to turn back, we still have time. Another minute.
Thunder snarled in the mountains. An avalanche started out small and ended up huge and monstrous in a deep fissure. Light rain dotted Light's smooth white skin. In a minute, her hair was glistening and soggy with rain.
Too late now,
she shouted over the padding rhythm of her own naked feet.
We've got to go ahead.
And it was too late. Sim knew, judging the distances, that there was no turning back now. His leg began to pain him a little. He favored it, slowing. A wind came up swiftly, a cold wind that bit into the skin. But it came from the cliffs behind them, helped rather than hindered them. An omen, he wondered? No. For as the minutes went by, it grew upon him how poorly he had estimated the distance. Their time was dwindling out, but they were still an impossible distance from the ship. He said nothing, but the impotent anger at the slow muscles in his legs welled up into bitterly hot tears in his eyes. He knew that Light was thinking the same as himself, but she flung along like a white bird, seeming hardly to touch ground. He heard her breath go out and in her throat, like a clean, sharp knife in its sheath. Half the sky was dark. The first stars were peering through lengths of black cloud. Lightning jiggled a path along a rim just ahead of them. A full thunderstorm of violent rain and exploding electricity fell upon them. They slipped and skidded on moss-smooth pebbles. Light fell, scrambled up again with a burning oath. Her body was scarred and dirty. The rain washed over her. The rain came down and cried on Sim. It filled his eyes and ran in rivers down his spine, and he wanted to cry with it. Light fell and did not rise, sucking her breath, her breasts quivering. He picked her up and held her. "Run, Light! Please, run!" "Leave me, Sim. Go ahead." The rain filled her mouth. There was water everywhere. "It's no use. Go on without me." He stood there cold and powerless, his thoughts sagging, the flame of hope blinking out. All the world was blackness, cold falling sheets of water and despair. "We'll walk then," he said, "and keep walking, and resting." They walked for 50 yards, easily, slowly, like children out for a stroll. The gully ahead of them filled with water that went sliding away with a swift, wet sound toward the horizon. Sim cried out. Tugging at Light, he raced forward. "A new channel," he said, pointing. "Each day the rain cuts a new channel. Here, Light!" He leaned over the floodwaters. He dived in, taking her with him. The flood swept them like bits of wood. They fought to stay upright. The water got into their mouths, their noses. The land swept by on both sides of them. Clutching Light's finger with insane strength, Sim felt himself hurled end over end, saw flicks of lightning on high, and a new fierce hope was born in him. They could no longer run? Well, then they would let the water do the running for them. With a speed that dashed them against rocks, split open their shoulders, abraded their legs, the new, brief river carried them. "This way!" Sim shouted over a salvo of thunder and steered frantically toward the opposite side of the gully. The mountain where the ship lay was just ahead. They must not pass it by. They fought in the transporting liquid and were slammed against the far side. Sim leaped up, caught at an overhanging rock, locked Light in his legs, and drew himself hand over hand upward. As quickly as it had come, the storm was gone. The lightning faded, the rain ceased. The clouds melted and fell away over the sky. The wind whispered into silence. "The ship." Light lay upon the ground. "The ship, Sim. This is the mountain of the ship." Now the cold came. The killing cold. They forced themselves drunkenly up the mountain. The cold slid along their limbs, got into their arteries like a chemical, and slowed them. Ahead of them, with a fresh-washed sheen, lay the ship. It was a dream. Sim could not believe that they were actually so near it. 200 yards, 170 yards. Gods, but it was cold. The ground became covered with ice. They slipped and fell again and again. Behind them, the river was frozen into a blue-white snake of cold solidity. A few last drops of rain from somewhere came down as hard pellets. Sim fell against the bulk of the ship. He was actually touching it. Touching it! He heard Light whimpering in her constricted throat. This was the metal, the ship. How many others had touched it in the long days? He and Light had made it. He touched it lovingly. Then, as cold as the air, his veins were chilled. Where was the entrance? You run, you swim, you almost drown, you curse, you sweat, you work. You reach a mountain, you go up it, you hammer on metal, you shout with relief. You reach the ship, and then you can't find the entrance. He fought to keep himself from breaking down. Slowly, he told himself, but not too slowly. Go around the ship. The metal slid under his searching hands, so cold that his hands, sweating, almost froze to it. Now, far around to the side, light moved with him. The cold held them like a fist. It began to squeeze. The entrance. Metal. Cold, immutable metal. A thin line of opening at the ceiling point. Throwing all caution aside, he beat at it. He felt his stomach seething with cold. His fingers were numb. His eyes were half frozen in their sockets. He began to beat and search and scream against the metal door. "Open up! Open up!" He staggered. The airlock sighed. With a whispering of metal on rubber beddings, the door swung softly sidewise and vanished back. He saw a light run forward, clutching at her throat, and drop inside a small, shiny chamber. He shuffled after her, blankly. The airlock door sealed shut behind him. He could not breathe. His heartbeat began to slow, to stop. They were trapped inside the ship now, and something was happening. He sank down to his knees and choked for air. The ship he had come to for salvation was now slowing his pulse, darkening his brain, poisoning him. With a starved, faint kind of expiring terror, he realized that he was dying. Blackness. He had a dim sense of time passing, of thinking, struggling to make his heart go quick, quick, to make his eyes focus. But the fluid in his body lagged quietly through his settling veins, and he heard his temple pulses thud, pause, thud, pause, and thud again, with lulling intermissions. He could not move, not a hand or leg or finger. It was an effort to lift the tonnage of his eyelashes. He could not shift his face even to see Light lying beside him. From a distance came her irregular breathing. It was like the sound a wounded bird makes with his dry, unraveled pinions. She was so close he could almost feel the heat of her, yet she seemed a long way removed. "I'm getting cold," he thought. "Is this death? This slowing of blood, of my heart? This cooling of my body? This drowsy thinking of thoughts?" Staring at the ship's ceiling, he traced its intricate system of tubes and machines. The knowledge, the purpose of the ship, its actions, seeped into him. He began to understand in a kind of revealing lassitude just what these things were his eyes rested upon. Slow, slow. There was an instrument with a gleaming white dial. Its purpose? He drudged away at the problem, like a man underwater. People had used the dial, touched it. People had repaired it, installed it. People had dreamed of it before the building, before the installing, before the repairing and touching and using. The dial contained memory of use and manufacture. Its very shape was a dream memory telling Sim why and for what it had been built. Given time, looking at anything, he could draw from it the knowledge he desired. Some dim part of him reached out, dissected the contents of things, analyzed them. This dial measured time. Millions of days of time. But how could that be? Sim's eyes dilated, hot and glittering. Where were humans who needed such an instrument? Blood thrummed and beat behind his eyes. He closed them. Panic came to him. The day was passing. I am lying here, he thought, and my life slips away. I cannot move. My youth is passing. How long before I can move? Through a kind of porthole he saw the night pass, the day come, the day pass, and again another night. Stars danced frostily. I will lie here for 4 or 5 days, wrinkling and withering, he thought. This ship will not let me move. How much better if I had stayed in my home cliff, lived, enjoyed this short life. What good has it done to come here? I'm missing all the twilights and dawns. I'll never touch Light, though she's here at my side. Delirium. His mind floated up. His thoughts whirled through the metal ship. He smelled the razor-sharp smell of joined metal. He heard the hull contract with night, relax with day. Dawn. Already another dawn. Today I would have been mature. His jaw clenched. I must get up. I must move. I must enjoy my time of maturity. But he did not move. He felt his blood pump sleepily from chamber to red chamber in his heart, on, down, and around through his dead body, to be purified by his folding and unfolding lungs. Then the circuit once more. The ship grew warm. From somewhere a machine clicked. Automatically the temperature cooled. A controlled gust of air flushed the room. Night again. And then another day. He lay and saw 4 days of his life pass. He did not try to fight. It was no use. His life was over. He didn't want to turn his head now. He didn't want to see Light with her face like his tortured mother's. Eyelids like gray ash flakes. Eyes like beaten, sanded metal. Cheeks like eroded stones. He didn't want to see a throat like parched thongs of yellow grass. Hands the pattern of smoke risen from a fire. Breasts like desiccated rinds, and hair stubbly and unshorn as moist gray weeds. And himself? How did he look? Was his jaw sunken, the flesh of his eyes pitted, his brow lined and age-scarred? His strength began to return. He felt his heart beating so slow that it was amazing. 100 beats a minute. Impossible. He felt so cool, so thoughtful, so easy. His head fell over to one side. He stared at Light. He shouted in surprise. She was young and fair. She was looking at him, too weak to say anything. Her eyes were like tiny silver medals. Her throat curved like the arm of a child. Her hair was blue fire eating at her scalp, fed by the slender life of her body. 4 days had passed, and still she was young. No, younger than when they had entered the ship. She was still adolescent. He could not believe it. Her first words were, "How long will this last?" He replied carefully, "I don't know." "We are still young." The ship. Its metal is around us. It cuts away the sun and the things that came from the sun to age us. Her eyes shifted thoughtfully. "Then, if we stay here, we'll remain young." 6 more days? 14 more? 20? More than that, maybe. She lay there silently. After a long time, she said, "Sim?" "Yes." "Let's stay here. Let's not go back. If we go back now, you know what'll happen to us." "I'm not certain." "We'll start getting old again, won't we?" He looked away again. He stared at the ceiling and the clock with the moving finger. "Yes, we'll grow old." "What if we grow old instantly? When we step from the ship, won't the shock be too much?" "Maybe." Another silence. He began to move his limbs, testing them. He was very hungry. "The others are waiting," he said. Her next words made him gasp. "The others are dead," she said. "Or will be in a few hours. All those we knew back there are old and worn." He tried to picture them old. Dark, his sister, bent and senile with time. He shook his head, wiping the picture away. "They may die," he said, "but there are others who have been born." "People we don't even know," said Light flatly. "But nevertheless, our people," he replied. People who will live only 8 days or 11 days unless we help them.
But we're young, Sim. We're young. We can stay young.
He didn't want to listen. It was too tempting a thing to listen to. To stay here, to live. We've already had more time than the others, he said. I need workers. Men to heal this ship. We'll get on our feet now, you and I, and find food, eat, and see if the ship is movable. I'm afraid to try to move it myself. It's so big. I'll need help.
But that means running back all that distance.
I know. He lifted himself weakly. But I'll do it.
How will you get the men back here?
We'll use the river.
If it's there, it may be somewhere else.
We'll wait until there is one, then. I've got to go back, Light. The son of Dink is waiting for me. My sister, your brother, are old people, ready to die and waiting for some word from us. After a long while he heard her move, dragging herself tiredly to him. She put her head upon his chest, her eyes closed, stroking his arm.
I'm sorry. Forgive me. You have to go back. I'm a selfish fool.
He touched her cheek, clumsily. You're human. I understand you. There's nothing to forgive. They found food. They walked through the ship. It was empty. Only in the control room did they find the remains of a man who must have been the chief pilot. The others had evidently bailed out into space in emergency lifeboats. This pilot, sitting at its controls, alone, had landed the ship on a mountain within sight of other fallen and smashed crafts. Its location on high ground had saved it from the floods. The pilot himself had died, probably of heart failure soon after landing. The ship had remained here, almost within reach of the other survivors. Perfect as an egg, but silent for how many thousand days? If the pilot had lived, what a different thing life might have been for the ancestors of Sim and Light. Sim, thinking of this, felt the distant, ominous vibration of war. How had the war between worlds come out? Who had won? Or had both planets lost and never bothered trying to pick up survivors? Who had been right? Who was the enemy? Were Sim's people of the guilty or innocent side? They might never know. He checked the ship hurriedly. He knew nothing of its workings, yet as he walked its corridors, patted its machines, he learned from it. It needed only a crew. One man couldn't possibly set the whole thing running again. He laid his hand upon one round snout-like machine. He jerked his hand away, as if burnt. Light!
What is it?
He touched the machine again, caressed it. His hand trembled violently. His eyes welled with tears. His mouth opened and closed. He looked at the machine, loving it, then looked at Light. With this machine, he stammered softly, incredulously. With this machine, I can...
What, Sim?
He inserted his hand into a cup-like contraption with a lever inside. Out of porthole in front of him, he could see the distant line of cliffs. We were afraid there might never be another river running by this mountain, weren't we? He asked exultantly.
Yes, Sim, but...
There will be a river, and I will come back, tonight. And I'll bring men with me, 500 men, because with this machine I can blast a river bottom all the way to the cliffs, down which the waters will rush, giving myself and the men a swift, sure way of traveling back. He rubbed the machine's barrel-like body. When I touch it, the life and method of it shot into me. Watch! He depressed the lever. A beam of incandescent fire lanced out from the ship, screaming. Steadily, accurately, Sim began to cut away a riverbed for the storm waters to flow in. The night was turned to day by its hungry eating. The return to the cliffs was to be carried out by Sim alone. Light was to remain in the ship in case of any mishap. The trip back seemed at first glance to be impossible. There would be no river rushing to cut his time, to sweep him along toward his destination. He would have to run the entire distance in the dawn, and the sun would get him, catch him before he'd reach safety. The only way to do it is to start before sunrise.
But you'd be frozen, Sim.
Here. He made adjustments on the machine that had just finished cutting the riverbed in the rock floor of the valley. He lifted the smooth snout of the gun, pressed the lever, left it down. A gout of fire shot toward the cliffs. He fingered the range control, focused the flame end 3 miles from its source. Done. He turned to Light.
But I don't understand,
she said. He opened the airlock door. It's bitter cold out, and half an hour yet till dawn. If I run parallel to the flame from the machine, close enough to it, there'll not be much heat, but enough to sustain life anyway.
It doesn't sound safe,
Light protested. Nothing does on this world. He moved forward. I'll have half an hour start. That should be enough to reach the cliffs.
But if the machine should fail while you're still running near its beam?
Let's not think of that, he said. A moment later he was outside. He staggered as if kicked in the stomach. His heart almost exploded in him. The environment of his world forced him into swift living again. He felt his pulse rise, kicking through his veins. The night was cold as death. The heat ray from the ship sliced across the valley, humming solid and warm. He moved next to it, very close. One misstep in his running, and... "I'll be back," he called to Light. He and the ray of light went together. In the early morning, the peoples in the caves saw the long finger of orange incandescence, and the weird, whitish apparition floating, running along beside it. There was muttering and superstition. So when Sim finally reached the cliffs of his childhood, he saw alien peoples swarming there. There were no familiar faces. Then he realized how foolish it was to expect familiar faces. One of the older men glared down at him. "Who are you?" he shouted. "Are you from the enemy cliff? What's your name?" "I am Sim, the son of Sim."
"Sim?"
An old woman shrieked from the cliff above him. She came hobbling down the stone pathway.
"Sim! Sim, it is you!"
He looked at her, frankly bewildered. "But I don't know you," he murmured.
"Sim, don't you recognize me? Oh, Sim, it's me, Dark!"
"Dark!" He felt sick at his stomach. She fell into his arms, this old trembling woman with the half-blind eyes. His sister. Another face appeared above, that of an old man. A cruel, bitter face. It looked down at Sim and snarled.
"Drive him away,"
cried the old man.
"He comes from the cliff of the enemy. He's lived there. He's still young. Those who go there can never come back among us. Disloyal beast!"
And a rock hurtled down. Sim leaped aside, pulling the old woman with him. A roar came from the people. They ran toward Sim, shaking their fists.
"Kill him! Kill him!"
raved the old man, and Sim did not know who he was. "Stop!" Sim held out his hands. "I come from the ship!"
"The ship?"
The people slowed. Dark clung to him, looking up into his young face, puzzling over its smoothness.
"Kill him! Kill him! Kill him!"
croaked the old man and picked up another rock. "I offer you 10 days, 20 days, 30 more days of life." The people stopped. Their mouths hung open. Their eyes were incredulous.
30 days?
It was repeated again and again.
How?
"Come back to the ship with me. Inside it one can live forever." The old man lifted high a rock, then, choking, fell forward in an apoplectic fit, and tumbled down the rocks to lie at Sim's feet. Sim bent to peer at the Ancient One, at the bleary, dead eyes, the loose, snaring lips, the crumpled, quiet body. "Cheon."
"Yes,"
said Dark behind him, in a croaking, strange voice.
"Your enemy, Cheon."
That night 1,000 warriors started for the ship as if going to war. The water ran in the new channel. 500 of them were drowned or lost behind in the cold. The others with Sim got through to the ship. Light awaited them and threw wide the metal door. The weeks passed. Generations lived and died in the cliffs, while the 500 workers labored over the ship, learning its functions and its parts. On the last day they disbanded. Each ran to his station. Now there was a destiny of travel who still remained behind. Sim touched the control plates under his fingers. Light, rubbing her eyes, came and sat on the floor next to him, resting her head against his knee drowsily.
"I had a dream,"
she said, looking off at something far away.
"I dreamed I lived in caves in a cliff, on a cold, hot planet where people grew old and died in 8 days and were burnt."
"What an impossible dream," said Sim. "People couldn't possibly live in such a nightmare. Forget it. You're awake now." He touched the plates gently. The ship rose and moved into space. Sim was right. The nightmare was over at last. End of Chapter 9. End of The Creatures That Time Forgot by Ray Bradbury. Read by Ben Tucker.